The following program contains discussion of EN server story content, which will contain some spoilers. Viewer discretion is advised. Listen, we may all have our favorites among the Housewardens of NRC, but I think there are some boys who are objectively better at their jobs than others. In fact, the distinction between the good and the bad is pretty clear if you figure in duties alone, but I don't think doing so is any fun. So today we're going to find out who, in my totally non-biased opinion, is the best of the best at Night Raven College, Housewarden Edition. To make sure I'm not just ranking my faves high, we'll be looking into each Housewarden's personality, the care they put into tending their charges, and their dorm outfit cards' in-game utility as determining factors. I'll be giving each of these a score from 1 to 10 and using each boy's cumulative points to decide the winner. Sure, things will be a little skewed, but at least this way we aren't likely to run into any ties. I hope. So let's start off our ranking with Riddle Rosehearts, the Housewarden of Hearts level. Riddle is a very serious fellow with very strong convictions. A lot of Riddle's characteristics come from his upbringing, and those early childhood experiences still have a hold on him even after Book 1. His mother was ridiculously strict and essentially forced him to study in relative solitude for his whole life. Her lofty aspirations weighed heavily on him, and still do to some extent, despite the success he's been able to achieve. The only time he was able to get social interaction with his peers, at least to our knowledge when he was younger, was when he would sneak out of the house to play with Trey and Chenya. This inexperience in social situations shows in his interactions with fellow students, as he doesn't always get things that are outside of academics, like how some novels are made solely for entertainment and not for learning. However, he does try to understand and relate to his peers. Since he's only ever known order, Riddle tries very hard to ensure his actions are in line with his moral compass, even if it can make him stubborn and irritable at times. Because his upbringing was so strict, I think Riddle finds comfort in structure and order. He practically idolizes the Queen of Hearts' rules and upholds them to the utmost scrutiny, going as far as to run around Octagonal's common room after he got caught in the rain. This obsession can lend itself to some funny moments and is, in a sense, a needed quality for running a dorm, but it can be so heavy-handed that it overshadows Riddle's positive qualities. I don't think Riddle is bad by any means, but his character is a bit dry, and oddly enough, it's a little too safe for me. Riddle makes so much sense to me that I have a hard time articulating him properly. Like, to me, he just is how he is, and that's all there is to it. He is the way that he is because of what he's experienced, and while he is now trying to find balance, he's also not trying to change completely. Riddle will forever be the rules guy and will most likely be a law-abiding citizen for the rest of his life, even if sometimes he ends up drinking black tea at night. You know that he'll be straight with you, and if you're doing the things he deems correct, or at least trying to set yourself on that path, he'll be quite generous and kind. The problem comes when you disagree, since Riddle is extremely stubborn and set in his convictions. If you butt heads long enough, you'll see not just the roses turn red, and you'll likely end up with a fancy new necklace too. To me, overall, this makes him very fun within the context of the story, but if I had to deal with him on a day-to-day basis, I would get worn out. Props to Trey for handling him so well. Honestly, I don't think I could do it. So I'm going to rank his personality at a very mid-6. I feel like he's very one-note until you get a peek at his softer side, and while his backstory does add some depth and a whole lot of reason to his character, I'm just not as impressed by him. Well, I think I can give him another half point for the softness he displays during Ace's vignette, where he's super concerned for the health and safety of the hedgehogs, as it's just so cute. So we'll bump him up to a 6.5. But overall, Riddle just falls a little flat for me in the personality department. I think the other categories might score him some more points, so let's see how well he cares for his charges. The other Hearts level students can be unmotivated at times, and sometimes don't see the same value in academics as Riddle, which doesn't go over very well. But Riddle does genuinely want his fellows to succeed and will go to great lengths to help them out. When Deuce is struggling with math and legitimately trying to get it, Riddle gives him his textbook with notes to help him along the way. When Cater is in danger of failing, Riddle creates a Magicam account to communicate the necessary information in a way which Cater will understand. His generosity in this area is limited, as he then gives Cater a lovely stack of books to study from after the Magicam incident, but it is extremely impressive that because of his efforts, no one in Heartstable fails out of school. Whether through genuine care or the threat of punishment, Riddle does somehow get his charges off their behinds and onto productive matters, at least enough to survive school. I do think if Trey were not there to balance Riddle and handle some of the situations behind his back, like I think is what happens after Deuce's dorm uniform vignette story, things would be very, very different in the dorm. However, there are things that Riddle can do that Trey can't, like helping folks out with their studies. So there are advantages to having Riddle as your housewarden. Provided you follow a majority of the rules, you'd be very well taken care of and would have the support of one of the top mages at the school. However, if the reverse is true, then you're going to be living in a nightmare, so pick your battles wisely. I'm also unsure if Riddle provides his studying services out of genuine concern or prideful obligation. I can imagine that he might feel that it's his duty to ensure that every student succeeds, and so if that were to not happen, he might blame himself and put the weight of that failure on his own shoulders. This is not healthy, but I can see it being a reason that he's so strict about grades. I can also see it just being an extension of his mother's love style and him expressing his genuine care in this way, even though it may not be received as such. On the whole, I think he takes care of his students well. However, without help from Trey, I'm not sure how good things would really go. Regardless, I'm going to award him an 8 here since he does put legitimate effort into maintaining his dorm and his peers' academic careers. From a card perspective, Riddle's dorm uniform is a strong attacker, boasting 2 heavy-hitting fire spells and a third, less heavy-hitting but more utility-focused one. His single element does make this card more situational than some others, but when used well and in the right context, it can be a fantastic asset to your team. I had wanted this card for a really, really long time, and initially spent many a reroll in the tutorial gacha trying to get it. But now that I finally do have it, I rarely use it. If you're not going up against Flora enemies, it's not that useful, and while its strength is no joke, it's also not the strongest card out there either. I'm going to rank Riddle's dorm uniform card at a solid 5. It's not great, but it's not terrible. So in total, our boy Riddle gets 19.5 points. Not a bad start, but who knows how this score will hold up against our other contenders. So let's see who's next. Leona Kingscholar is a character who I initially hated, but he has grown on me quite a bit since our initial introduction. Out of all of the mortal housewardens, Leona is the oldest, and as such, one would assume that he'd be a bit more mature than the others. But his arrogance and prideful nature take away from him this maturity a bit, as he can get caught up over inconsequential things. He's also unwilling to engage with anyone or any situation he deems unworthy of his time, though his definition usually does not factor in actual status, just a person's skills, so I have to give him credit for fairness there. Leona is said to be very smart given his aptitude for chess and adjacent strategizing. In his labware vignette, we see that his knowledge of and skill in potionology is extremely good, almost on par with Corell's own described abilities, showing that he's very capable of succeeding academically. This is furthered during the beginning of Book 7, where we see that his grades qualify him for some of the more difficult internships. But even with this keen mind, Leona does not apply himself to very many things, and instead opts to nap or otherwise avoid responsibility. In fact, his laziness is a very real issue and is the sole factor holding him back from achieving greatness. Well, perhaps not the sole factor, but it is certainly exacerbating the situation. It almost seems like despite the success he achieves, he doesn't believe it's truly worth anything, so he keeps avoiding such situations instead. It almost makes me wonder if he let himself get held back a year on purpose to avoid going home and having to take on responsibilities. On the whole, Leona seems like a very stubborn and prideful character, but deep within him, I think he does care about himself and others. I think he puts on airs as to not seem weak, and he claims that most of the things he does for others are just to keep himself out of trouble, but I do think that at times this is a farce. It might convince his fellow classmen, but it's not convincing me, especially since we get a glimpse into a rare moment of reflection during the cloud calling event. Leona is caught staring up at the stars in contemplation as if he was consulting with the kings of the past on the future, but he denies such claims. Regardless of whether he was or wasn't, Leona does have some decent moments where the depth of his character is shown. Since he's rather fun overall and he has some nuance, I'm going to give him a solid 7 for personality. He's not the best of the best, but he's up there, and I think if I understood his motivations a bit better, I might rank him higher. Even though Leona is overall reluctant to take on responsibility, he manages his dorm super well. In fact, Savannah Claw is so well controlled by his authority that he doesn't even have a vice leader. Yeah, that's crazy, right? Ruggy isn't Savannah Claw's vice housewarden, even though he runs 1,001 errands for Leona, and one could claim that such actions kind of qualify him for that position. But canonically speaking, Savannah Claw is the only dorm to have no vice leader. Despite his laziness, Leona somehow manages to do all of the work himself while maintaining his control with physical and magical prowess. He's earned the respect of his fellow dorm mates and keeps them in check, at least once it starts to become a problem for him. Even if it's only his pride preventing him from having help, you do have to admit that this is ridiculously impressive. One could argue that there are other housewardens that would be capable enough to do this, and may have their vices as formalities. But as it stands in the canon, Leona is the only one actually doing it, so I have to give him props for that. With his negative attributes though, there are times where things are left unattended for a bit too long. Leona always steps in eventually to solve conflicts, but I do think he waits a bit to see if they might just resolve themselves instead. Funnily enough, I do think that this makes him a good leader overall, as it does offer folks just enough independence to foster their growth. However, once things get a little too fiery, Leona will snuff it out with a very effective reminder of who truly has the final say in these parts. I do think that independent conflict resolution is more coincidental than mindful on Leona's part, but it does seem to be effective overall, and I think it contributes to the respect he's earned from his dorm mates. He's not smothering them with the same expectations that Riddle gives to his charges, but he's also not letting them run amok either. There's just enough structure to be effective, but it's not overbearing, which is quite nice. Leona's the if I don't hear it, see it, or smell it, it doesn't exist type of manager, which I'm sure scores him points with his fellows. I think this nets him an 8.5 for tending to his dorm, with a few points being added in there simply because he's doing it alone. As far as Leona's dorm card goes though, it's one of my least favorites, but in an objective sense it is quite useful. Both Riddle and Leona have attack-oriented cards, given that they are attack-type cards, and Leona's does have a few good attributes. At max level, his first 2 spells will hit very strongly, and his third unlockable spell doesn't hit as hard, but it does drain foes' power, which can make it useful in battle. All the spells are Flora though, which means this card is locked into the same sorts of specific use cases as Riddle's. However, in those cases, this card will really shine. Since Leona and Riddle's cards are very similar and they both function in very similar ways, to be fair, I'm going to give Leona's card a score of 5 as well. This gives Leona a total overall score of 20.5 points. I didn't expect him to get so many, but so it goes, I guess. Next up on the list is Azul Ashengrotto, whose personality I find delightful. However, there are certainly pieces of it that are deliberately crafted. Azul is first and foremost insecure, and he puts up a lot of walls because of his insecurities. The whole businessman persona was crafted out of spite, and a lot of his intelligence was hard-won. He worked tirelessly to improve his magic and develop his special skill, using his unique octopus abilities to further these pursuits. To this day, his dedication to hard work is paramount to none, and all of his actions are meticulously planned out. He is extremely intelligent and cunning, and he uses his knowledge alongside his carefully crafted persona to lure in unsuspecting victims. As a deal maker, Azul can swindle just about anyone out of or into just about anything, but he does so with intricate precision rather than empty platitudes. He can twist his words to best suit the ears of any poor unfortunate soul, and his deals always seem like they'll benefit you, but at the end of the day, he's the one profiting. There are moments where his ambitions are less thickly veiled, and his armor is easy to crack if you know where to poke. But on the whole, Azul has a lot of tenacity, and I think that's his greatest strength as a character. He can and does work tirelessly for his goals, even going so far as to research hundreds of years of test data to create a study guide to use as a bargaining chip for free labor. He is meticulous and ruthless when it comes to business, but he's not all teeth. Since Azul is still insecure despite his accomplishments, he doesn't come across as a totally schmoozy putz. There is a softness to him, and you can catch him off guard every once in a while for some funny interactions, which I think make him a bit more endearing. He still loves his fried chicken and has his moments of charity that aren't strictly tied to plot or profit. Out of the three Octagonal boys, Azul seems to be the most malleable still, and the one most susceptible to change, which I think he might need to do lest he get wrapped up in a net bigger than his own. But I'm also just partial to the dealmaker archetype, as it's always so interesting to see where and when they slip up. Not in a sadistic way, I assure you, but those who build their houses from cards must be prepared to see them fall, and fall they always do. In terms of personality, Azul is another character that I think I'd have a tough time actually genuinely getting along with, but I do think he's very interesting and still has a lot of potential for growth, so I'm going to give him an 8. Now, as far as taking care of his fellow dorm mates goes, Azul is extremely lacking. I don't think he cares at all about the people under his foot, but he does care a lot about his position, so he's not tyrannical outright. In order to maintain his image and overall mystique, he needs his fellow dorm mates' loyalty, and with that trust, he can then use them as he sees fit, making them more assets than people in his eyes. He'll get your soul by any means necessary, and he'll do it so well you won't even know that you need to defend yourself until it's too late. We see in Jade's ceremonial robe vignette story that Azul has Jade collect all sorts of information on the new students, information that the trio will use to blackmail or extort their new charges to ensure their loyalty down the line. As far as Azul is concerned, his dorm mates, outside of Jade and Floyd of course, are just cogs in his machine and are ultimately only a means of making profit. Azul owns the Mastro Lounge, an on-campus restaurant run by students, which means he also oversees several employees who may or may not be also dorm members. I believe folks do have to endure some hazing from the Tweels before they become a permanent part of the crew, and even after they are, if they slip up, they might find their hearts shocked at Azul's insistence. Azul is a tough boss, and his dorm is run under similar pretenses. Sure, you could cry your heart out to him, but he's just going to find a way to profit off of it. He's not going to save your skin, especially not for free, so if you happen to be struggling and turn to him for help, be ready to sell your soul. I don't think Azul is good-natured in the slightest when it comes to those under his care, so he's getting a whopping 1 for this category. Azul's dorm uniform card is a balanced type with a water spell focus. It has the same weaknesses as Riddle and Leona's with a singular elemental focus, but it does also come with a healing ability that's helpful in not just defense exams. His duo is also with Riddle, so the two can be used together effectively in battles against flora and fire enemies. But as a standalone, I think this healing ability sets it apart from the previous two, since Azul can still dish out quite a bit of damage but he can also save you from certain doom if your health is running low, especially in those frustrating metal battles where you're so close to ending your foe, but you're also so close to losing. Of course, even in those situations, depending on the elements and other cards in your party, Azul may not be the best choice, so I'm going to give his card a 6. In total, Azul gets a whole 15 points, which is a tad bit sad, but the blackmailing is just too much of a negative to overlook. Now, Kalim Al-Asim is the personification of rainbows. You cannot look at this guy without smiling. His optimism isn't entirely natural. In fact, it stems pretty heavily from his circumstances, but it is a force to be reckoned with, and I don't think there is anyone else at NRC who can contend with him here. I mean, they say money can't buy happiness, and I think this is true to a degree, but not having to worry about when your next meal is coming or if you'll have clothes on your back can contribute to a positive mental outlook. However, Kalim's familial wealth is so extensive that these positives can get outweighed by the anxiety surrounding outsiders' intentions. There are a lot of folks out there who would want just a fraction of that wealth, and there's also folks out there willing to do terrible things just to get their piece of the pie. Kalim usually doesn't eat anything Jamil didn't cook, unless others have eaten it first because of a poisoning incident when he was young. Nearly dying because of someone else's greed could have easily influenced Kalim to become way more pessimistic and could have made him wary of others. Yet, the boy we know and love is the complete opposite of that, and is someone who tries actively to see the good in others. He isn't suspicious of people in the slightest, much to Jamil's annoyance, and he tries his best to get along with everyone even though his naivete can put him in awkward situations. Kalim chose to be positive and chooses to be happy because I don't think he wants to live in a world where people are as nefarious as they are. This is a wonderful outlook to have, but he can take it to the extreme, which isn't the best considering the environment he's currently in. Poor Jamil must always be so stressed about every situation where Kalim doesn't think things entirely through, which is like every situation. But I think this positive mental attitude comes with its own sort of fortitude, as we can see Kalim being very determined. Not only will he not give up on Jamil, but he also won't rat him out to Jade because of his strong faith in him. Kalim's also not one to get discouraged, which I think helps him come up with creative solutions to problems. In his labware vignette, he figures out a very creative solution to him not being allowed to use knives, per Jamil, and uses magic to control them instead of his hands so that he's not breaking the rules. Even with these positive qualities, he is still very naive, so he does also get himself into trouble. However, out of all of the Housewardens at NRC, I have to say he's got the best personality. He's a 10 out of 10 for sure, so he gets a full 10 here. As far as actually running the dorm is concerned, Kalim falls a bit flat, although it's also not because of any malicious intent. Kalim is a bit of a party guy, and so his dorm mates do have a lot of fun, but all play and no work does not make a great mage. It's revealed to us in Book 4 that Scarabia, despite being the embodiment of mindfulness and said to house intelligent and thoughtful students, is the dorm with the lowest grades overall. So dire is the situation that a training camp is held over winter break, although this is more so pretext for Jamil's plans than true concern for the students, at least from Jamil. I do think that in Book 4, Kalim genuinely cares about his charges and does want to see them improve. And because of that, it's very easy for Jamil to take advantage of him. But Kalim's also not equipped to actually help anyone academically. He and Silver end up having to take remedials with Karel over slacking off in class, and on the whole, I can't imagine Kalim's grades are all that great. Which is a shame because he can do it, he just needs the right kind of help, and his lack of awareness prevents Jamil from being able to give it to him. When the Octagonal trio steps in during Book 4, Kalim's studying improves due to Azul's advice. But any advice that Jamil tries to give usually goes by the wayside since Kalim is dense to those suggestions, given his perception of their friendship. This usually leaves most of the housewarden work on Jamil's plate instead of Kalim's. Outside of the housewarden meetings, the actual duties and day-to-day tasks seem to be handled mainly by Jamil, who one could argue is therefore technically the actual housewarden, but on paper, Kalim holds the title, so the credit goes to him. Unfortunately, I think that Kalim, specifically in this area, just doesn't cut it, but his lack of care is only because of his personal shortcomings, not because of any ulterior motives, so I'm going to give him a 3. Kalim's Dora uniform card is a water cosmic balance type card. At max rank, his spells can be useful, as they do not only do strong damage, but his water spell also boosts water damage of allies during that turn. If used smartly, this card can be very good in a variety of situations, although because both the first and third spell are water, this card still does have its weaknesses. Flora battles are mainly out of the question, and both the HP and power stats at max level without optimization are a little lacking. I think I'm going to give this card a 6, since the cosmic inclusion does open up some possibilities, at least compared to the single element cards we've previously discussed. This leaves Kalim at the grand total of 19 points, which is absolutely wild, and I'm starting to think I might have done Riddle a little dirty, but the decisions have been made and there's no taking them back now. So we shall move on to our next housewarden. Vil Schoenheit, world-class model, actor, and poison maker. If this video was solely based on my blanket opinion, Vil would have immediately taken the top spot, no contest. But I will do my best to rank him fairly. As far as his character goes, Vil is charismatic and knows exactly what he wants and how to get it. He's obsessed with beauty and being loved, so much that he wants to be the most beautiful person on stage and remain there until the very end of the performance. Vil has incredible drive and determination, and overall seems very secure in himself. However, we can see moments of weakness where his insecurities get the better of him, like how he checks on Nej's socials and how he demands Rook's attention. Generally though, Vil is very mature and level-headed. He's already got a great career going for him, and he's extremely mindful of his actions and how they can be perceived. Vil also isn't one to artificially inflate his ego either by seeking empty platitudes. He and Rook became friends because the two of them had differing opinions on film, and Vil valued that input immensely. He wants to improve himself to be the very best of the best, and you can't do that without critique. The only time that feedback seems to bother him is with Nej, but outside of that, anyone else's jabs don't have much of an effect. Vil is also able to handle others with such grace, and we can see him dealing with Leona and other characters very efficiently. He's strong in his convictions and also strict with himself, making sure not to do or say things that would affect him and his image negatively. However, unlike Riddle, Vil does exercise balance and does take little treats from time to time, like in his labware vignette, but he makes sure to counterbalance them with other actions. He's also very smart and picks up on others' intentions swiftly. This is a skill I assume he's developed during his time as a child star and as a celebrity in general, since there are always thorns among roses. Vil is calculating, but not overly shrewd, and he knows just how much he can get away with. He's also very good with establishing and maintaining boundaries with his schoolfellows, another skill that I'm sure he developed during his rising stardom. Vil is a character I really respect who defied my initial expectations, and I'm really glad that he's not the stereotypical celebrity snob who's just out of touch with reality, and I think his more nuanced characterization is really well done. But oddly enough, for some reason, I also find him in a similar space as Riddle, where he makes so much sense to me it's a bit boring. Of course he'd be like this, he's Vil after all, but he has a little bit more nuance to him than I see with Riddle, so for personality, I'm going to give Vil an 8. As far as caring for his dorm goes, Vil is an absolute mother hen. He enforces strict standards for aesthetics and has his reasons for the rules he upholds that go beyond tradition. In his dorm uniform vignette, we can see him formulating special diets for his dorm mates that suit their unique nutritional needs. Sure, this is because of a magazine interview that's coming up, but he could have absolutely put them on a cabbage diet or something ridiculous like that if he only cared about the aesthetics. However, he takes great care in crafting a plan that can work for them long term and keep them healthy, something that he'd only do if he genuinely cared. Even the ridiculous window cleaning task he gives Epple had more than one rationale and leads to a variety of great results. Vil absolutely cares for those under his wing, and while he does preen quite a bit to make sure that everyone is always at their most beautiful, he's not unreasonable. I'm sure in Vil's mind he figures if you have any self-respect that you'd present yourself well. Also, since you are a reflection of the dorm and him, you'd better be giving it your best. He's not going to accept any slacking for any reason, so I think he does push students to become the very best versions of themselves, even if his methods are not always accepted by those students. While his motives may be a little selfish, his actions do garner him a lot of respect. If it didn't, there's no way our boys would have had to fight through waves and waves of students just to get to the ballroom during the SDC. But even that action had another purpose since it acted as a warm-up before dancing. The things Vil does may not always make the most sense to outsiders, but they almost always benefit his dorm mates in some way. I think Pomfiore is in fantastic hands with Vil at the helm, and I think the students appreciate him even though he's strict. He's really not that unreasonable overall, and most of the folks in his dorm already value aesthetics, so I think they absolutely understand where Vil is coming from. I think from a care perspective, Vil gets a solid 8. I feel like he's the perfect balance between Riddle and Leona's styles, and with the added bonus of subtle but genuine care. Vil's dorm uniform card is a Flora Cosmic defense type card, which has a very interesting ability. His first Flora spell can curse your opponents, which prevents them from healing, which can be incredibly useful in basic exams and some of the story battles. However, I cannot tell you how many times this ability has screwed me over in defense exams because I cannot for the life of me remember that it exists, and I end up cursing the only enemy with healing spells, completely ruining my chances of a triple S. It's a time and a half, but I think if I were being a bit more cognizant, it wouldn't be an issue at all. This card also pairs very well with Leona's duo since they have similar strengths and elemental alignments. Using the two together can make for some very powerful comboing, particularly against water enemies. But even alone, this card is useful in a few more situations because of the cosmic inclusion. I'm going to give this card a 7 because I think the curse ability is very unique, fits his character perfectly, and has a variety of uses outside of defense exams that make it very valuable. This brings Vil to a total of 23 points. Not a perfect score, which I'm sure would upset him, but it is still a high score nonetheless. Next up is Idia Shroud, who seems like a mysterious, introverted, shy kid upon first introduction. While he is an introvert and does stay quiet most of the time, once he opens his mouth, everything changes. He's not super chatty unless it's about one of his interests, but he is super blunt and has no regard for anyone's feelings. Sugarcoating? That's extremely impractical. Why would he do that? Some of this can be chalked up to a lack of social skills since Idia keeps to himself and his room frequently. He has very little social interaction with anyone outside of Ortho and maybe Azul, and such isolation can impact one's ability to read social situations, which can in turn lead to unintentional insults. But I don't think Idia cares about this at all when he's talking. He's got this whole everyone else is just a pleb mentality, so he doesn't really care if what he says hurts your feelings. To him, it's the truth and there's nothing more to it than that, so if you don't like that, then it's your problem. Despite this, he's also pretty self-conscious and a bit insecure. He seems to be worried about people talking about his appearance behind his back, and when he is confronted face to face, the poor guy panics 9 times out of 10. Getting trapped in a conversation between Kalim and Kater is his worst nightmare, and if he could just stay in his room all day to avoid people altogether, he would. Idia is most comfortable talking through a screen or with some other buffer, like the board games or Ortho. He's got a lot of social anxiety, which I think might also influence his blunt statements. He's also not the most optimistic person either, given the weight he still feels from IRL Ortho's death, and from the fact that his future is pretty much set in stone. Even if he wanted to go out into the world and experience the joys of extroverted life, he can't because he's beholden to Styx and all of the responsibilities that come with it. Even when he receives an internship acceptance letter by one of the biggest tech companies out there, he gets a bit sad since he can't actually take the position. It seems like Idia feels pretty trapped, and because of that, he's keeping himself down, all the while claiming he's better than everyone else. It's a very interesting internal conflict that I do enjoy seeing played out in the story. Idia is also one of the most self-aware characters too, and has some moments where he subtly breaks the fourth wall. At the end of the day, he's an introverted butthole, but in a very delightful way. If I was at the school, I don't think I'd even know he existed, and his communication skills are a little rough without a buffer, so for personality, I'm going to give him a 4. As far as how he tends the dorm, I'm honestly surprised that Idia even attends the Housewarden meetings, and I have no idea if he actually does anything outside of that in his role. Idia did not want to become a housewarden and was gifted the position by the previous dorm leader. And I'm not sure his dorm mates really even cared that he's there. I'd be surprised if anyone outside of his class year even knew who he was, given how much time that he spends in his room. I can't think of any time during the main story where we get to see either Idia or Ortho lead the dorm in any capacity. I only know that in Idia's ceremonial robe vignette, it's mentioned that Ortho runs things for Idia since Idia doesn't want to interact with others face to face. All of Book 6 is dedicated to Styx, which is unrelated to Ignihide, so I really don't have too much to say here. I don't have either of Idia or Ortho's dorm cards, so I had to look up their vignettes just to see if there were hints there about anything dorm related. And Idia gets so much hate from his dorm mates, my goodness. I mean, he also dishes it out as well, so like tit for tat, but they attack Primo just because he likes them, which is savage. Then the fact that they now respect him because he took 2 minutes to scold them is also just wild. Like, what is this dorm? It was a fantastic read, but I don't think it gets Idia very many points. It feels like Ignihide is rather self-sufficient, and perhaps this is because most of the students in it are also introverts. It's hard to get into any trouble if you just stay at home, so like I guess Idia has the easiest out of everybody maybe? Even when his dorm mates try to cause trouble, it's usually in the tech sphere, and Idia is able to handle that in mere minutes. But he's not gonna do that if they aren't doing things that personally affect him. On the whole, Idia really doesn't care about his charges at all. He does go to the meetings, like I mentioned before, but generally only in his tablet form, and mostly because of Riddle. If not for Riddle, I doubt we'd ever see Idia doing anything Housewarden related, and all of the work would continue to get dumped on Ortho. So for managing his charges, Idia gets half a point. I was very tempted to give him a 0, but he does go to the meetings, so half a point it is. Idia is one of the 2 dorm leaders that I don't yet have their dorm uniform card, but from what I know of, his card is very unique. Idia is a fire cosmic, rounding out our single element cosmic duos, and is a defense type card. As a defense type card, one might imagine that he has a healing ability or to nullify a curse or something along those lines. But what Idia actually has is way more special. His first spell, the fire one, has a debuff removal which will remove any and all debuffs on allied characters, at least if my sources are correct. This means if you're cursed, blinded, burned, frozen, or otherwise indisposed, Idia can fix that right up. In a damage-oriented battle, he can clear the damage debuffs. If you're burned and running out of time, Idia can mitigate at least part of the damage. If you're in a defense exam and need a character to be able to heal next turn, but they're cursed, put Idia into the ring. This debuff removal seems like it'd be so useful, so of course its caveat is that it's tied to the elemental spell and not the cosmic one. This can limit its use as I'm sure you wouldn't want to take extra damage facing a water spell just to get rid of a single pesky debuff. I'm giving his card an 8 because I think this ability, even though it is tied to an elemental spell, is so unique and can be used in so many situations that this card is a very strong contender where utility is concerned, especially when compared to the other dorm cards. With that said, Idia gets a total of 12.5. I think this score fits him quite well, and in fact might be a bit more than I would have given him out of just instinct, but perhaps Malleus will fall flat and save Idia from last place. Our last contender is Malleus Draconia, an imposing royal baddie who really is just a dork who loves architecture. Well, I suppose that's a bit too reductive, but he does enjoy gargoyles more than anyone else in this universe, so he's got that going for him. Malleus is a very unique character with a very powerful aura. As a Fey Prince, his magic is practically boundless, and he can draw on the very fabric of nature for further magical might. But even though he's well versed in spell work, he's not familiar with the world at large or the people in it. He is a Fey Prince, which does come with restrictions, particularly where personal relationships are concerned. From what I know, given the circumstances explored in Lilia's dream, Malleus's birth was nothing short of a miracle, and as the only heir to the throne, he is considered precious by the whole of Briarland. So precious, in fact, that he's essentially been isolated his whole life within the country to keep him safe. The whole reason Malleus is even at NRC is because of Lilia's insistence, as Lilia is very well aware of what having a narrow mind could do for not only Malleus but the future of the country. Unfortunately, because of Malleus's strong aura, everyone is too afraid to approach him, so he's not getting much social interaction outside of his dorm mates. This, combined with his previous isolation, makes him pretty naive and does impact how he interacts with others once they do approach him. He can come off as a bit too pushy, since he doesn't really know what the boundaries are for non-Fey individuals. I don't have his dorm card, but I did look up the vignette for it, and it's a prime example of this. Malleus is sad that he keeps missing the Housewarden meetings because of his skewed perception of time, so he decides to bring the meeting to him without telling anyone outside of his dorm that he was doing this. So, when the rest of the Housewardens and the head mage go to the mirror chamber for the next meeting, they're very surprised and very justifiably angry at suddenly being teleported without their consent to Diasomnia. Malleus has a hard time understanding why they wouldn't be grateful that he prepared the dorm for their arrival, and I think this speaks volumes to his naivety overall. It also comes off as arrogant on his part that he would just assume that everyone would be so grateful for such a gesture. The lack of understanding of not only others, but time, only furthers his isolation and is really sad, because once you get to know him, he's really a decent fellow. Malleus is very cordial and expresses himself well, and acts as a prince should. However, he also doesn't get particularly excited, and even when he's talking with magical talking gargoyles, the most amazing thing ever, he still remains respectful. This can make it hard for folks to get close to him, even his own friends, and it also contributes to the mystical aura he has. But we also see that he is very protective of his friends, and despite his calm demeanor, has a lot of complex emotions deep down. The events of Book 7 really bring this to light, and it makes me so mad that the MC does not pick up on the fact that Malleus is really sad at the beginning of that book when he gives the story of why he freezes things, all while it is snowing outside. Like, I know the plot's got a plot, but can you give him a hug? Anyways, I feel that Malleus is a complex character with a lot of nuance, similar to Leona and Vil. But I also find him endearing and much less of a butthole than Leona or Idia, even though Mal at times can be way more arrogant than either. So I'm going to give his personality a 9. As far as caring for his charges goes, I think Mal is also a little negligent. Lilia attends all of the meetings for him since he can't get the time stuff straightened out, and he misses many important ceremonies for that same reason. In fact, he's never actually gone to an orientation because he's not been explicitly invited, and I don't understand why no one has told him that the very title of Housewarden is his invite, and that not only is he invited, but it is his solemn duty to attend. Like, why does Riddle not bang on Malleus's door like he does with Idia? Why do folks let Malleus get a pass? Why does no one tell him what's going on ever? Why? But there is also the question of why Malleus doesn't try to involve himself in the matters. Why doesn't he take the initiative to seek answers out for himself? Is it because he's so certain that everyone is afraid of him that he doesn't even try? It's just quite a time overall. But even though he's not good with the on-paper duties, it does seem like overall the dorm is run very well. I think if it was left solely to Lilia, there might be a little bit more silliness going on, but I think Malleus's overall aura just demands attention. I also think that if anyone in his dorm was really that stupid to cross him, they'd end up worse for wear. Even if Malleus wasn't the one to lift a finger in punishment, Sebek will be chewing them out forever, and I don't think anyone wants that fate. In fact, I feel like Sebek would cause and solve problems before they even got to Malleus with his dedication to his lord. Since Malleus has the support of not only Lilia, but Silver and Sebek as well, I doubt there's very much internal conflict in the dorm. And since he could swiftly resolve conflicts were they to arise, I think he's decently good here. I don't know of any examples of him directly influencing his charges, as he probably doesn't get to interact too much with his other dorm mates, but I can't imagine him being cruel or unwilling to help if he was asked. In fact, I think he'd be delighted to be approached, and he'd also be ecstatic to receive an invitation to the dorm meetings. All of that said, I think he takes good care of those close to him, and wouldn't have a problem managing the dorm directly if he was involved a bit more. But as it stands, he does seem to have a bit of a hands-off approach, so I'm going to give him a 6 here. I also don't have Malleus's dorm uniform card because I was saving gems at the time, but it will eventually be mine. Until then, it's a completely cosmic attack type card, which fits Malleus thematically, but also makes its utility interesting. There are no weaknesses, but there are no strengths. Truly balanced, as all things should be. But while it can go anywhere and everywhere, there isn't any particular context where it shines. At least that would be the case if you looked at elemental bonuses alone. Given that this is an attack type card, the damage output ought to be decent, and Malleus got a similar max power stat to some of the other attack dorm cards. But, unlike any of the other cards, Malleus raises critical chance for himself, and once his third spell is unlocked, his allies. Critical is a stat boost that allows the affected unit to do 25% more damage, at least if my sources are to be believed, meaning this guy can hit very hard and can make other cards hit very hard as well. If you give another character a crit buff when they're at an elemental advantage, I imagine your enemy is going to be obliterated. This does mean that despite the cosmic forces allowing for overall use in every situation, this card is meant entirely for damage, which for a majority of situations will be beneficial. I can't completely rate this utility because I can't personally test the critical chances to see just how good they are, but based on what I think, this card is getting an 8. So this leaves Mal with a nice, clean score of 23, which means if we take everyone's tallied points and line them up from last to first, we have Idia in 7th place with a 12.5, Azul in 6th with 15, Kalim in 5th with 19, Riddle in 4th with 19.5, Leona in 3rd with 20.5, and both Vil and Malleus tied for first with 23 points. I was really hoping a tie wouldn't happen, but now that it has, there is only one way to resolve this once and for all. We're using the fairest method known to man. The best of 3 coin toss. Vil will get heads because of his beautiful face, and Malleus will get tails because he has a tail. Game set, match, start. Our first coin goes to Malleus. Our second coin goes to Malleus. Ooh, with a sweep like that, Malleus beats out the competition fair and square, making Malleus the best housewarden in all of Twisted Wonderland. How amazing that we accurately, scientifically decided this with numbers and math. I can't believe it went so well. But I must ask, do you agree that Mal is the best of the best? Or would you rank someone else higher using these metrics? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you liked this video and want to see more like it, leave a comment, leave a like, or maybe even subscribe to let me know. I'd really appreciate it. But now, before you go, I'd just like to remind you that you're amazing, and I hope you have a wonderful day.